Many years ago, I was just a few months into being a manager. And I remember one morning waking up, looking at my calendar, and just feeling totally exhausted looking at my back-to-back meetings. So before my kids woke up, I opened up my work laptop, and within 20 minutes or so, I had opened up a few pull requests to delete unused code. Faced with a day of back-to-back meetings, I was just so desperate to feel some sense of accomplishment and productivity. And what I found is that's a really common way that engineers turned managers look at meetings. When can they be over so that I actually have time to work? Over the years, though, I've developed a passion for meetings and sharing tactical tips with other people so that you don't also have to suffer through long and boring meetings anymore. And by developing a passion for meetings, what I mean is I've developed a passion for helping people have fewer meetings and make sure that the meetings they're in are actually effective. And so in this talk, we're going to talk about how do you manage your meeting load so that you don't succumb to Zoom fatigue, which is all too common these days. And to do this, we'll take a look at some of the different challenges that people face when they're dealing with meetings. So challenge number one, super basic, too many meetings, right? Everyone's in meetings all the time, especially on remote. You get Zoom fatigue. People are getting migraines from staring at screens all the time, declining engagement. People just aren't even paying attention in the meetings. And then all those meetings cut into your focus time. So we're just in meetings way too much, and we don't even get the benefit of being in person where you can actually get some steps in, you can get some variety moving from conference room to conference room. And even before the pandemic and everyone moving to remote, it was already hard enough to get enough focus time. And what I've been hearing is that people are adding meetings. People are having more meetings than they were having before the pandemic when they were in person, when a lot of offices were in person, because they're trying to fill in that context that they used to get when they could swing by someone's desk or have to ask someone something over lunch. And so people are actually having more meetings than ever. So the tip I have for you here to have fewer meetings is to really lean on asynchronous updates. And so for updates, that could be, team updates, company updates, anything that doesn't need to be a conversation, take it to an asynchronous tool. So a really easy guideline is to avoid using synchronous time, which is super valuable. Avoid using synchronous time for status updates. And when you look for tools for asynchronous communications, you can think about using, you can record video on Loom. Like instead of having company announcements, you can just record them on Loom and you can see who watched them. You can use Range, which is where I work, for check-ins, so daily check-ins or whatever your schedule is, to reduce the need or actually completely replace your daily stand-up. So who needs to go every morning at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. be on a Zoom call for another 30 minutes, you can just have an asynchronous update, asynchronous check-in to replace that. So the tip is really just to lean on asynchronous updates, and that will actually allow you to cancel some of your recurring meetings. The second challenge is one I think we're all too familiar with, meetings that are aimless or easily overrun by a few people who get carried away. And I'm sure you've all had this experience of being in a meeting that maybe had an unclear agenda. Maybe it was scheduled for an hour and it's getting to 55 minutes in. It seems like it's just going to keep going. Maybe partway through, a few people hijack it and they get kind of carried away talking to each other and they go down some rat hole. And meanwhile, everyone else in the meeting just sits quietly by on mute. Maybe they're looking at their phones or they just start doing other work. Everyone's just kind of tolerating this meeting going on and hoping that they can get out soon. The solution or the tip here is to really get clear on the purpose and the structure of a meeting. The purpose and the structure of a meeting. So here's a really concrete example. every Monday morning, the team at Range has a weekly briefing, and it's a short meeting. And this is the purpose. I'll cover the purpose and the structure. The purpose is that everyone in the meeting comes together to start the week off, review high-level metrics, and share important announcements. And the structure of the meeting looks like this. First, the facilitator plays music for the first 5 minutes as people join. People may chat a bit about their weekends or just quietly finish up their coffee or finish making their coffee. Second, we have an opening round. People share how they're doing. They may share about their weekends. They may basically just share a brief, we go around the room, people share just a brief reflection of how they're showing up for the meeting. 3, we review top-level company metrics, and our CEO highlights anything notable, and people can ask questions. 4th is we have short 2-minute team updates from the 3 top-level teams. These are also published to a Slack channel as well. 5th, we have open space open time for announcements and brief discussion topics. So anyone can bring up an agenda item, and then we have a brief conversation about it. And then 6th, similar to having an opening round, we have a closing round with a prompt that the facilitator will choose. And usually it's something like, what's something you're looking forward to this week? Or what's something that's been working well that you want to keep doing? And we go around the room and everyone has a chance to share. And that's it. The facilitator puts the music back on, everyone leaves the Zoom room, and that only takes about 25 minutes. And it's a very welcome and thankfully brief start to the week. And this is just one of the meetings we have. At Range, every single meeting we have that's recurring is similarly intentional in its purpose and structure. We run all the meetings through the Range meeting tool, which makes facilitation super easy. The third challenge, people are not participating in meetings, right? Especially on Zoom, you can kind of turn your video off or put yourself on mute and switch to your other monitor and do some other stuff, right? I was talking to someone recently about his team stand-ups and how he might consider moving some of their stand-ups to asynchronous check-ins. And his main concern was that, well, if we do that, some of the quieter team members, what will they say when they're in a meeting, right? The status update is something that's really easy to get. It's an easy way to get people engaged in meetings, to say, okay, yesterday I worked on this project. Today I'm waiting for this PR to get reviewed and I'm not blocked on anything. Like, at least they're saying something, right? And so this is kind of a crutch for people to get engagement in their meetings. So the tip here I have for you is something I already mentioned before. Start and end your meetings with opening and closing rounds. Research shows that when people say something at the beginning of a meeting, they are far more likely to contribute to the rest of the meeting. And this is even more important remotely because meetings are basically often your only interactions. And you may have like ad hoc video calls, but for the most part, meetings are your only interactions with your coworkers where you actually are having synchronous time with them. So what do you do during these opening and closing rounds? It can be as simple as, how are you doing today? Or how are you showing up for this meeting? We also have an easy icebreaker tool where you can shuffle through different questions. And some of them are work-related, like how do you like to receive feedback? And some of them are more casual and silly, like one of my favorites was like, what was one of your favorite comfort foods as a kid? And it's just really fun to go around and hear from everyone, like, what's your favorite office snack? If we were to stock an office kitchen, what would be your pick? Mine was, I think, the green bag of the Sun Chips. I forget the flavor, but definitely Sun Chips. Challenge number 4, meetings can take over your calendar, right? Even if specific meetings are well run and efficient, having so many meetings across your week can fill up all your focus time so you don't have time to get work done. So we used to have at Range a twice a week product collab meeting on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific time. And, a few months in, I found that for me, it was right in the middle of a nice juicy chunk of focus time that I had blocked out to code. And I thought, well, maybe it's just me. Maybe this time is actually really good for everyone else. And what was surprising to me is that when I raised this issue in one of the meetings and suggested or just did a quick informal poll of like, hey, would anyone actually prefer for it to be in the morning, or does everyone want it to be in the afternoon? It turns out that everyone actually preferred for the meeting to be earlier in the day, and everyone similarly wanted their afternoon for focus work. But because the meeting was already scheduled for in the afternoon, no one really felt like they could go ahead and bring this up and change it. And so we moved it, and so now everyone has a ton more focus time Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. So the tip here is to zoom out and think about the cadence of meetings for either for yourself or for an individual on your team for a week or two. So zoom out from the day-to-day and look at a week or two in their schedule. And you can be really intentional. You can be intentional, and you can encourage other people to be intentional about defragging their calendars. Let me give you a really concrete example of what a 2-week cycle looks like for someone on our team. So Stephanie is an engineer on the Range team, and every Monday morning she meets with the entire Range team for the weekly briefing, which I mentioned earlier. The first week of each cycle, she also participates in her team's cycle planning. That's also Monday afternoons. And then on Thursday, she has that hour of product collab time where people across different teams but are still on product bring demos for feedback and topics for discussions. Often, actually, that meeting is scheduled for an hour, but more often than not, that meeting ends a half hour early because it is so structured. And when we run out of topics, it often ends a half hour early, and we end up playing Scattergories or Draw Battle or a bunch of other silly games that ends up with everyone laughing hysterically. If she wants to have more social time with coworkers, there's an optional half hour on Tuesday and on Friday of the first week where anyone in the company can join, and we'll just pick a game and play it for half an hour. And then the 2-week cycle ends with a 1.5-hour structured full team recap, which includes personal reflections, celebrations, founder thoughts, and Q&A. And these are all of her team meetings over the course of 2 weeks. She also does have a few bi-weekly one-on-ones that she's scheduled all for the first week of the 2-week cycle. She made this extremely clear to me when I joined Range. She's like, you cannot, this is my one-on-one week. Please do not schedule your one-on-one with me on the other week. And she did this really intentionally to defrag her calendar so that she doesn't have one-on-ones spread across the whole 2-week cycle, and that the second week she has a lot more focus time. It can often feel like meetings are something that happen to you. And hopefully just from this example, you can see that there's a different way to look at it, right? You can take control of your calendar, and by doing that, you can model for other teammates how to take control of your calendar, move things around, and make more focused time for yourself. So to end, I just want to acknowledge that, just again, that you may hear all this and you may think, well, I don't really have the ability to change how the meetings are run, how often they are. They kind of show up on my calendar, and then I just have to show up. And a few years ago, I used to be in a weekly cross-functional multi-team coordination meeting, and it had a very unclear purpose. It was kind of suggested, hey, let's meet because our teams all kind of work together, so maybe we should, have some alignment, like kind of generally, let's stay aligned, right? That was the very vague purpose that was the initial reason for this meeting. And this meeting had a lot of people in it that were more senior than I was, a lot of execs. And so for many months, I sat through it, I tolerated it until finally I couldn't stand it anymore. And after the meeting, I drafted and shared a brief, suggested purpose for the meeting and a structure for the meeting and sent it by email. And I was so surprised, let me tell you, people were so appreciative that I had thought about how to improve the meeting, because everyone, here's the lesson I learned, everyone hates efficient meetings. Okay, even the people who seem to be intentionally hijacking the meeting so that they can hear themselves speak, they are actually thankful when you cut them off. They're thankful when you keep everyone on track and create some structure and make it easier for them to focus. I used to think that one of my worst qualities in my personal life and at work was that I was super impatient. And through meetings, I found, and over the years, I found that my impatience is also a superpower. It lets me be that person that speaks up in meetings and says, hey, is this something we can do asynchronously? Or can you two take this discussion offline? I don't think it's as relevant to the rest of us here. Or can we maybe make this meeting shorter or merge it with another meeting? So go forth. You have a lot of tools in your tool belt now. Go forth and, for the sake of yourself and for your team, reduce your overall meeting time and make sure that the time you do spend in meetings is intentional and well spent.
I agree. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
Yeah, me as well. I mean, this is a topic that you could talk about every year and probably have something to learn, something to say about it, because it's a constant struggle for all of us.
Yeah.
I love that you kind of share this research about, it kind of, if someone speaks at the beginning of the meeting, they're more likely to actually engage in having those start and end, opening and closing rounds. Makes a lot of sense. And I can see in the chat, everybody loves calendar defragging. Very, reminding us of the before the solid state days. And I 100% resonate with this idea, because a lot of managers probably don't do this, of like looking at an individual level and looking and seeing for the people on your team and for yourself, right, where you can kind of defrag as you described. So that's great.
Yeah, exactly. And model, I think it's really important to model that behavior and tell people, like, kind of give them permission to defrag, because they may not know, like, they're like, oh, you're more busy than I am, so like I should just deal with it and show up to these meetings that are scattered all over my focus blocks.
And isn't it funny how, like you were alluding to, that sometimes you think you're the only one that has the concern, but actually nobody wants to say anything. And when you're the brave one that does, suddenly everybody else agrees, right?
Yeah. It's really just embracing this mindset of, having agency over your calendar and also experimenting, right? Hey, let's try moving this meeting to 10 a.m. for 2 weeks, and then we'll debrief and see how it goes. And it can be easy as putting on Slack and saying like, hey, thumbs up if you like this better, and thumbs down, give me a emoji reaction, and that can be the debrief, and just have it be really lightweight.
Totally. It's like, why not? So I'm going to dive into the questions from folks in the Q&A tab. So this first question from Tyler is, how can we promote connectedness between our people without adding more meetings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is something I'm going to plug Range ruthlessly right here, because this is something that we do every day. So we have Range as the, you have an asynchronous daily check-in. And then at the bottom of the asynchronous daily check-in, you also choose an emoji that represents your mood. And then we have a team question. So this could be something as silly as like, what was one of your pets growing up? But it could also be something like, what musical instrument did you play when you were a child? Or like sometimes it's around communication or feedback. And it's like, what's a time when someone gave you feedback that was really helpful? And then like it kind of builds on each other. So over a week, you have, it might start off really simple, really easy to answer. And by Thursday, it's like, how would you like to receive feedback at work? And so it's kind of the core, like really important ways that you want to feel connected to your team, both in like, how do you work better together, but just like, what did these people do over the weekend? So Monday, excuse me, Monday, the question is always like, what was the highlight of your weekend? What did you do over the weekend? And so you kind of get to, after you check in, you see everyone's answer to that question. That's like one of my favorite parts of my day every day, is just getting to read through and see how people responded to the question. So you can use range, but having ways that people can learn about each other that are not synchronous. And in some ways it's more inclusive, right? Because a lot of times in office settings, there's in groups and there's out groups and there's cliques and there's people who feel excluded. And this way, when it's all there, people who may have, maybe quieter, maybe prefer to, they may not speak up in a lunch conversation, but they're willing to, type out some childhood story or something that they did do over the weekend that they really enjoyed. They get to be included and they get to be a part of that. And so, I onboarded to Range in the middle of the pandemic. I haven't met most of the team in person, and like, I can honestly say I feel like I know them. I feel like I feel connected to them.
I appreciate that you're dispelling the myth that it's not possible to create a connected conversation that's asynchronous and not, doesn't require like all of the human expression from that you might get in a traditional meeting. It's possible to be both efficient and like human and compassionate. So
yeah, and some people may want to type more. We also have regular social times that are not at like 6 p.m. right? They're like after lunch, like 1 to 1:30, and we play all these games. And that's really fun just because people are stressed out right now. I mean, we're a year into the pandemic, and we play Draw Battle, we play Scattergories, which then I posted it in the chat, really boring website. And we play all these fun games, and we end up just like, people are crying. They're laughing so hard, they're crying. And it's just a really good stress release. And like, I honestly, in the past year, I think the most I've laughed is playing drawing games with friends, and just like, or drawing games with coworkers, and like, just laughing at my ridiculously terrible drawings.
I love that you bring the humanity to your meetings and encourage that from others. This next question is from Maria. How do you motivate the team to read/watch through all the asynchronous updates? If there's no dedicated time for an update, many people would skip the updates and miss out on important information. At least that's the fear.
Yeah. So it depends. I mean, on the flip side, there's like the implicit assumption that if you have people in a Zoom room or an in-person room, that they're paying attention, right? Which is not always the case, right? And this way, at least you have a record. And so people, if they're like, you know what, I don't really know what this person's working on. I don't know. They can at least go back and check, right? And so that's one key thing. With Range, we also have like a moment where we say, like, there's kind of the like prompt to check in, and then there's the when do you want to like review the check-in. So people will be prompted to check in before the time to review. When we've done other asynchronous things, like we've experimented with a mix of asynchronous and synchronous brainstorming, and in those situations, there's like a very clear like, okay, take the next 48 hours, like find an hour in there where you feel like, you feel more creative, and come up with some ideas for, some prompts. So rather than getting all in a room and doing stickies like you would in person, we say, hey, like, you've got 24 hours or 48 hours, just find 1 hour that works for you, and like add some ideas. And then you have to do it before this other meeting. And then the meetings can be really short. We have like, you can have a half-hour meeting to kick off the brainstorming, a half-hour meeting at the end, but that's like a forcing function to make sure that people do the asynchronous work. So you can kind of play around with that and really treat it as an experiment, right? Because we're all kind of, there's definitely teams that have been remote for years, or for a long time, but for a lot of us, we're all new to this, and so be willing to experiment and really pitch it to your team as an experiment too, because then it's just easier to accept that.
Well, I love that, that possibility that when you're asynchronous, you can still avoid groupthink and also provide all the thoughtfulness you might in like the post-it sessions. I'm reminded of the days when I was doing those post-it sessions, these affinity diagrams with actually like Braden, one of your coworkers at Range back at Google. years
Yeah,
ago.
it's really, I think I found that having that mix of async and sync gives people who may not participate in a like in the same room brainstorming session, they may be quieter, they may sit back. It actually gives them more agency to contribute in the ways that they're comfortable.
Totally, I love it. This next question from Siddharth, in this time of highly agenda-driven meetings over Zoom, how do we make space for more casual interactions that help people get to know each other?
One way we've done this, especially when we found that like people kind of work on their team, like they have recurring meetings with a certain set of people, and they don't really get to see other people outside of that set. We set up donut coffee chats, so you can set that up with your a Slack channel, and anyone who joins that Slack channel will get paired up bi-weekly for chats. And some people will go for walks and talk on the phone, or I have one scheduled for tomorrow. We're gonna each go to our respective boba places, get boba, and like chat on the phone. Some people play games during that time. Yeah, and then we've also done a mix of like other types of things. We often end our 2-week retros or with a what we call range cribs, and so you can sign up, and someone will kind of give you a tour of where they live. So just kind of finding creative ways to bring in a bit of humanity of like who your coworkers are outside of this background and this space that you see all the time. Finding ways to do that. I really want to do like a pet show and tell. It's like I don't have pets, so like having people bring their dogs and introduce them. But yeah, you got to be a little bit creative. But I don't think that getting on a Zoom and having like like a 6 p.m. happy hour every week that people feel like they need to go to, like that's not working. One thing we're going to try out is having sets of 3 people sign up. You can sign up, and then the sets of 3 people are going to decide how they want to have a happy hour, whether or not they want to invite their families or people that they live with, roommates. Yeah, and I'm curious to see like what different formats will emerge. Maybe like they'll play games, maybe have those like kind of location based video chats. We've done a bit of that too.
I definitely hear this notion that you have to be very conscious and thoughtful about creating these things, especially
Yes.
during
Yeah. I think it's when you're super intentional and thoughtful about it, it can actually be better and more inclusive, because when you're in person, you kind of have this safety net of people are around. And so that fills in the gaps. Whereas when you're remote, the worst case is worse, but the best case is people feel more included.
Totally. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. This one from Nebosha. Companies perhaps switch to remote work, but overall work is still heavily synchronous, and that enforces more meetings than before. Any tips on how to switch to a more async team org?
I think this one, it requires more time and more planning. So for example, brainstorming, we just ran this brainstorming and prioritization exercise. And that's something that you're like, oh, if you were like, well, we need to do it before tomorrow, right? Then like, probably it's going to be fairly synchronous. But if you give it a bit of time and you're like, well, we need to get this done in the next week, then you can really like spread it out. You can have a kickoff 30 minutes. You can have, give people 2 days to do it, or even just 24 hours. You can meet back together to prioritize and then like pick tasks off of it. And so I think just planning ahead a little bit will help a lot. Yeah, that's what comes to mind for me. It just takes a bit more time and intentionality.
Makes sense. Last question from William. As a manager, how do you effectively schedule direct and skip level one-on-ones so that your schedule is not overloaded, but you don't get too distant from your people?
I generally give people the choice if they want to do weekly or biweekly, and I'll check in with them every every few months if the schedule is working for them. Some people have decided to switch from biweekly to weekly. Some people are like, no, I'm going to switch from weekly to biweekly. As a manager, your schedule is going to be definitely more full than the engineers on your team. And so having some expectation of that, but also like one tip that I saw recently was backfilling, like figuring out the how much time you want to be spending in one-on-ones, and then figuring out, I think it's Uma Chingunde posted about this, about her first 90 days as a VPN, but like, figure out all the people you need to keep in touch with, and then figure out the time you have, and then backfill that into those slots rather than, just scheduling everyone and then you have no more time to do any other work other than one-on-ones.
Very wise. With that, Jean, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom, telling us a little bit about range. It sounds awesome. And say hi to the folks out there who have worked with in the past, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Sure. Thank you.